to earth. Do you remember? Why have we taken birth? Do you remember?
Yeah. Amen. And so it is. You guys sound fantastic. Thank you. And Chris, thank you. Chris Johnson, our music director. Hey, Chris. Heart Song and Choir. All righty. Whew. Pray for me. First service questions were easy. You guys have more time to think and write. You're more awake. The caffeine's kicked in, right? So thank you. We've got some excellent questions here that we're going to play with. And hopefully we'll get through all of them. There's a couple I'm going to burn through quickly, hopefully. And because they're simpler and then some are a little deeper and stuff like that. So we'll play with that. And I thank you for asking that. It's sometimes it's just good to open up and say, what's on your mind? What's the question? So I'm going to start off with what year and where was religious science established, and why is CSL no longer called religious science? Do you know what year and where well, Los Angeles. I'm going to say early 50s or late 40s. Yeah, sounds good to me. It's somewhere in there. Ernest Holmes originally wrote the original Science of Mind textbook in 1926. It was edited into the kind of official version that we have now in 1938. And it kind of morphed into being a religion somewhere in the 40s or early 50s. He was doing talk shows. He was doing filling the Wilshire Able Theater with... The way it started, by the way, was Ernest reading a whole lot of philosophy, including Troward, the stuff that I'm going to be teaching about in the history class. When we say history class, it isn't just history, it's the philosophy that's behind the science of mind. So it's good stuff. But he started reading this, and he started to form discussion groups in his living room to talk about this stuff, because he was excited about it. He saw the potential for changing the world, and you guys are back from Mexico. And, sorry. And, so it was just starting off like that, and by the time he kept on going, he was doing a radio show. He was speaking to a full house in the Wilshire Able Theater in Los Angeles, and so it's just people kept coming who were more and more excited about this teaching, and that's how the whole thing started. We had a question in the first service of, did Ernest want to start this as a religion? And his original intention was no. He saw this as overlapping with all the other religions of the world. That you could still be a Catholic, you could still be a Protestant, you could still be a Jew, you could still be a Muslim, a Hindu, whatever you were, and take this teaching and practice it, because it pulls from the essence of every teaching. Every teaching has this in it somewhere. Okay? What happened was, a whole lot of people said, yeah, but then I go to my traditional Baptist church and they tell me I'm a sinner, and I'm going to hell unless I do it just exactly right, and I haven't, and how can I resolve that with what you're teaching me, that God loves me infinitely and I'm just an expression of God? So out of that came the churches and the religions and the ministers and that process. So the movement became, the teaching is the science of mind. That's what it's called. The teaching is the science of mind. And originally it was called the science of mind and spirit. The churches became religious science, and churches of religious science. Around, well, I was involved in the first Center for Spiritual Living because it was Seattle. Seattle got tired of, a lot of us in Seattle got tired of answering the question, are you Scientology and are you Christian Science? And we are not either one. We have a cousin relationship, you might say, with Christian Science. We have no relationship whatsoever with Scientology. And so, in 1994, we decided to take a vote on what to call the church. It had been called SCORES, which is Seattle Church of Religious Science, for a long time. And we took a vote and said, do we want to keep that name or do we want to change it to something else? And so we had Seattle Church of Religious Science, we had Center for Spiritual Living, and we had something else in the ballot, and the overwhelming majority said Center for Spiritual Living. And as far as I know, that was the first Center for Spiritual Living in our movement. After a while, a few other churches started taking that up. They turned to Center for Spiritual Living, Center for Spiritual Awakening, which we still have down in Sacramento, and several other places, and names like that that started to get us away from religious science, which we felt was a little bit of an outdated term, into what are we really? We really are centers for spiritual living. And by the way, you individually are a center for spiritual living. Okay? So that's what we felt that it described who we are and what we're about more fully than that. So officially, we are still churches of religious science doing business as centers for spiritual living. If you look at the license, for across the board, that's who we truly are. We still are religious science. We call it, our practitioners religious science practitioners. We still have all that label and stuff. We still teach the same philosophy, but we just changed the name because it was easier to remember. It was more accurate of a description of who we are, and it started to get us away from the questions of, are you Scientology? And so, hopefully that answers the question from the person who asked that. Then we had several people asking kind of similar questions. So how is Jesus regarded in Science of Mind, and how does religious science work with the Jesus risen from the tomb myth? I'll answer the second question first, because it's a really easy answer. Come in 2 weeks. Easter Sunday, Jesus risen from the tomb. Come in 2 weeks. We'll talk about that. How is Jesus regarded in Science of Mind? Jesus is regarded as the great example rather than the great exception. In a lot of our traditional Christian religions, Jesus is put up on a pedestal and worshiped, and it's called the exception. He is God, we're not. Which is not, by the way, what he said at all. He said, don't call me good, it's the Father within me, that does the work, it's the Father within. He kept pointing to the Father within. He kept pointing us to God, to that spiritual presence, but some people decided to move that into a different thing, and like so many other religions do, and many other things do, put him up on a pedestal. And so that's where he lives today in many religions, is up on the pedestal, instead of being, who do I follow the example of Jesus? It's just, do I worship him? Do I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior? And once I say yes to that, then I'm good, I'm done, And that's not what we say. We say, no, you got to walk the talk. Somebody asked a question about that also. We got to walk the talk. We got to actually apply what he taught. We got to apply what we teach and live by what we teach. So it's not just enough to say, I accept this, and then to go on. So we view Jesus as the example. We view Jesus as the guide. Most of the people who started the early New Thought movements, unity and religious science and divine science, were asking the question of, Jesus said you can do all these things. All these things like I have done, you shall do, and more, and greater things shall you do. And so the question became, was he telling the truth? If so, did he mean me? And if so, how? And so the pursuit of that how is the pursuit of new thought. Because he taught the how in the Bible, in the Gospels, if you understand it and if you read it. It's taught in the Torah, the Old Testament, if you understand it and read it. It's taught in Hindu, if you understand it and read it. And so the question is, how can we apply that teaching? How can we learn it? How can we see it? And how can we apply it? Instead of just, once you put a person up on a pedestal, you don't really pay attention to what they're doing anymore, right? I remember the Beatles, when they were at their height of their popularity back in the mid-'60s, they'd show up and they'd do concerts, and they said they couldn't even hear themselves because so many people were screaming. You remember seeing the pictures of that, and maybe some of you were at some of those concerts, I don't know. But they said after a while they heard one of the concerts and they realized how terrible they sounded at the concert. They were embarrassed about how bad they were playing. But nobody noticed because they had put them up on such a pedestal. They were the Beatles, okay? The same thing happens with anybody that we put up on a pedestal. We stop paying attention to who they truly are and just leave them up there on the pedestal and worship them. And so Jesus is the classic example of that. The other thing I'll say about Jesus in Science of Mind philosophy is that approximately 95% of the quotes that Ernest Holmes uses in the Science of Mind textbook are from the Bible. They're from the Bible. Somebody asked him, what religion we're closest to. Yeah, what are CSL ideas? Oh, I'm sorry, that's a different one. But what are we closest to? We're closest to what I would call true traditional or foundational Christianity. What did this teacher teach? Ernest also studied Hindu, and so he pulled a number of ideas from Hinduism and Buddhism. But it's really the Christian and Hebrew Bible that were the core of his study, as well as the philosophers who wrote about that. So if you read Emma Curtis Hopkins, who's one of his teachers, she has Bible lessons 1 and 2, books that she's written. There's a whole section at the back of the Science of Mind textbook where he interprets different Bible verses and stuff like that. So we're very closely aligned to what I would call the original Christianity as was practiced prior to kind of going off in the Paulist direction, which is where they started following Paul's idea rather than Jesus' ideas. And that's a more complicated process than I want to talk about here, but that's it. What are CSL ideas of original sin of man that Catholics believe we were born with? We believe we were born pure. Matthew Fox, who was formerly a Catholic priest, wrote a book called Original Blessings. We are an original blessing. So we don't believe in original sin. We don't believe in original sin. We believe that each of us, each person on the planet, everyone is born pure and of spirit. So there's not something that we have to, you don't have a strike against you before you were even born. So we don't believe in that. Hopefully that answers that. What does Science of Mind say about the afterlife, reincarnation, and heaven? Ernest, in the Science of Mind textbook, gets more into his personal beliefs. If you read the book, he talks about principle a lot, but then he talks somewhat about his personal beliefs. And basically what he says is, we are life eternal. It's not just this body. We keep on going as far as life is concerned. So there is not only an afterlife, there's a before life. Okay? This is just us passing through this particular place and time, doing this particular dance called being in this particular human form as, the body you're occupying. Tap it, just make sure you've got it, you're still there, right? Okay. So we're occupying that body, we're playing in this particular time and space, and we're not limited to that, we're more than that. And so out of that then, reincarnation, his interpretation, and this is just his personal view of reincarnation, was why would we necessarily have to show up on this planet when there could be all sorts of infinite number of other ways that we could show up and places we could show up. If the universe is infinite, if God is infinite, there's an infinite bunch of choices that we could do. So that's just his particular take on reincarnation. Some people say he didn't believe in it. I disagree with that. I believe he believed differently about it than just we're on this planet cycling through over and over and over and over again. He said there's more possibilities than that. Okay. So that covers him. Afterlife and heaven. Heaven, again, is not a place to go to. Heaven is a state of consciousness right here and right now. How many of you have been in heaven? How many of you have been in hell? Okay. A Zen master was once asked about suicide. And he said, suicide, interesting concept. Kill the body to quiet the mind. The mind keeps on going. Who I am continues on. If I'm in pain, my mental pain and emotional pain is going to continue whether my body's present here or not until I resolve it. It's one of the things, I danced with suicide for a long time, from my teens, into my probably 50s. And one of the things that kind of, especially later on, kept me going was, I don't want to bail now and then have to start all over again, having forgotten everything I've learned. I've come a long ways. Maybe it's not perfect. And yeah, there's this thing at the moment that feels scary or painful or whatever, but I'm not bailing yet. I look at what some of the kids have to put up with, as they grow up today, with all the drugs and all sorts of stuff that was not anywhere near present when I grew up. And it's just like, I think I'm going to milk this life for all I can get out of it, So heaven and hell are both states of consciousness. Heaven is when we know our oneness with Spirit. Heaven is where we feel our unity and our oneness. And hell, very simply, is where we don't. And again, if you look in the Christian and the Hebrew Bible, it says the same thing. To Jesus, hell wasn't a place. In the Jewish tradition, Gehenna, I believe it was called, was the underworld. There was a belief that all people who died, their souls just went under the ground. All souls. Same as the Greeks. They had Hades. Okay? And it wasn't a good or bad place. It was just a place where you went after you laid down your body. And so that was what the original definition of hell was. It had nothing to do with fire and brimstone. That came much later by people who interpreted other people, Jesus. That was John the Revelator and his whole lake of fire and all that stuff. And then, of course, I always love the Spanish Inquisition, who created a whole lot of our definitions of hell and the devil and all that stuff. And I've always I've watched the writers of that. I've read some of the writers of that time, and it's like getting a bunch of 11 and 12-year-old boys together creating bigger monsters. You ever watch kids get together and the monster was like this? Oh, and it also had this. Ooh, and it also had this, Okay? And that's kind of how the devil got really expanded out and created. It wasn't like that. That wasn't the devil of Jesus' time. Shaitan, which became translated as Satan, simply meant error thinking off. Get thee behind me the thoughts that I don't want. Okay, it wasn't some big boogeyman. The story of Job starts off with God and Satan sitting around having a conversation about Job and about people who are loyal to him. They're chatting with each other. They're buds. Hey, what about this guy? And so, if we recognize that is all a metaphor, that is all storytelling to make sense to people who are not scientific linear like we are in 20th and 21st century Western culture, but they're making stories to say, to talk about this, to do examples. See, Job did not really exist. Job was an expression of, let's explore this. Jonah was an expression of, let's explore that idea. And there's different ideas that were going on in the Hebrew tradition at that point in time. That's a class by itself. Does science of mind have a position? This is similar on beings from other dimensions, ETs, UFOs. Are they real, here to help or not? A source of knowledge unknown to man. No, it doesn't have a position. Except that Ernest says, basically it's what makes us think that this particular form of life is the only form there is. Okay? That there may be other forms of life, and they may or may not be any wiser than we are. So it's kind of be careful who you listen to, which is the truth of this world. Right? Be careful who you listen to. So, truth is truth. I would rather get it directly from the source. We have our wonderful reading from Ernest that I must find my way back to the central fire if I am to be warmed. I must find the source if I am to be supplied. And so it's not, ultimately we let go of all the gurus, what are they called that people channel? I'm sorry, whoever asked that question. Ascended masters and people like that. We have to let go of them and say, is this really true for me? Now, whatever we use to get to that point is fine. If it works for you, it works for you. But is it truth? Is it that capital T truth? Does it resonate within you? I used the example, I think, a week or two ago, that when I grew up in the Catholic Church, they said God is love. That felt like truth to me. And they said, and also, by the way, all those people who aren't Catholic are going to hell. Okay? That didn't feel like truth to me. Now, I was being told by a priest and by an authority figure. The Pope, at the time, would have said the same thing. Okay? But is it really truth? Does it really resonate as, this is what an absolute, infinite, loving God would do? Or be like? And so, the question isn't, we don't really have a position on UFOs and all that. Is it possible? Sure. It's a pretty darn big universe the last time I checked. It probably has, one other life form besides us in it, The more important thing is, how do I live my life on this planet? Do I live in alignment with the highest truth I know? Rather than, do I have the right ascended master? Okay. Hopefully that covers that. When my friends ask me what is the real difference between the Spiritual Center and other regular churches, what could a short answer be? Ernest Holmes, who many of you know if you've ever read him, was a little wordy, was asked to put in 25 words or less, what is science of mind about? And he said, science of mind is the compilation of religion, philosophy, and science applied to human needs and aspirations. Okay? The way that I would rephrase that is we look at the spiritual principles that are taught in every single spiritual teaching and ask ourselves, how can we apply them to our lives today? And we have fun doing it. Okay? We don't believe in hellfire and damnation. We don't believe that you're a bad person or that there is, sin in the way that it's taught. One of the things that people oftentimes have a challenge with is when their friends ask them about this teaching, what about it? I want to tell you something. We have a fabulous website that has what we believe on it, that has a whole lot about us. Don't be afraid. If you don't know what to say to somebody, say, first of all, tell them what you get out of it. Why are you here? Most of you who have been here for more than, this is your first Sunday, are starting to get something and notice a shift in your life out of it. And even some of you who it's your first Sunday or your first few Sundays, you've had a feeling of, man, I go there and I feel like I've just come home. I found a group of people who believe what I believe, and it feels really good. Okay? That's all they're asking you. That's all anybody's asking you. Will this fit for me? If they ask you, hey, how's that restaurant you went to for dinner last night? They want to find out, will it fit for them? You say, man, they got the best ribs on the planet. I know that I'm not going to go there because I'm not into ribs. I don't eat meat. Okay? But if people are looking for what resonates with them. And so all you need to do is talk about how this resonates for you, and they get to decide. And they'll decide whether that works for them or doesn't work for them. Because this place, guess what, doesn't work for everybody. Some people like more structure, more rules, and to be told, you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and that's not what we're really about. As long as you park between the white lines in the parking lot and don't park in the turnaround out there because we need access for fire trucks, that's about our major dogma here. So we're a place that explores, what does spirit mean to me? How do I relate to spirit? And then how do I take that and relate it into my life and bring that into my life? Does that help whoever asks that question? Thank you. Good, thank you. I didn't want to put you too much on the spot, but yeah. And if they want to get into the details of it, send them to the website. I do. I'm a minister, but I'm not going to stand there and have a 25-hour conversation with a person about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin and what we believe about that. It's like, send them to the website. Tell them to look up about us, what we believe. Look up some of the history and just see if it looks like something that resonates with you. So you don't have to have the burden of trying to explain science of mind. You can go out and say, hi, I'm a Catholic, and people pretty much know what you believe, or I'm a Lutheran, or I'm a Muslim, or whatever, and people pretty much know what you believe, okay? When you go out and say, I'm a religious scientist, or I go to Center for Spiritual Living, you say, huh, what? Because we're not a big, well-known religion that has that history. So, yeah, we're working on it, and we're doing quite well, actually. So so send them to the website. Pardon me? And YouTube. Yeah, tell him to go watch it. Tell him you got a fabulous minister and tell him to go watch one of his talks. Then we got a few questions on treatment. Treatment, what does that mean? If it's prayer, why not say prayer? Great question. It is prayer. The reason we don't always call it as prayer is because there are other forms of prayer. And many of us learned those in our former traditions, right? They're called beseeching. Dear God, please. Okay? They're called bargaining. I'll be really good if you'll just. Okay? And that's not what we do here. That's not what we believe in. So treatment, the purpose of a treatment, a spiritual mind treatment, is to change our consciousness. It's not to change God, it's to change us. God's fine. Have you noticed? Whole, perfect, complete. It doesn't need to change. But it's to change our consciousness, become more in line with God in a particular area of our life. If we're having a physical illness, we're changing our consciousness to come into a greater alignment with the health, the life energy, the vitality of the universe as being the truth that's showing up in my body. If we're having a financial problem, we're changing our consciousness, my consciousness, to come into a greater alignment with that. So that's the purpose of a spiritual mind treatment, and the reason, frankly, the term comes somewhat out of Christian Science. Thank you, Mary Baker Eddy. And it's an older term, but it was used to designate and to differentiate between what we call also affirmative prayer, which is I pray in the affirmative, I pray now, not that I hope it's going to happen someday in the future, but that it's real now. And this is the truth of me now, because the truth of each of us right now is we are the health, the wholeness, the financial abundance, the love, the freedom, the creativity of God. That's the truth of us on a spiritual level. And all we're trying to do is remember that and wake up to that truth on the physical level in our own individual lives. Again, it goes back to to Ernest's reading here, that if we're out of alignment, when we're out of harmony with some special good, it is because we're off track along that particular line of the activity of spirit. And so our purpose of prayer is to get us back into alignment. The purpose of prayer that most of us learned was to get God to give me something. Dear God, please help my team to win the football game. Then you run into a problem, when you're cheering for the Oregon Ducks and Reverend Mary is cheering for the Ohio State Buckeyes. And I'm cheering for the Seahawks, and Ray over here is cheering for, what's that team? The 49ers. What's God supposed to do with that? I mean, God loves Mary as much as me, right? And me as much as Mary. There's no differentiation in God. So we are praying here to open up our own consciousness. That's what treatment is about. Will you speak to the seeming dichotomy between the last step of treatment to release and the concept of treat and move your feet? Excellent question. The age-old question of the balance between actionless activity, such as is talked about in the Tao Te Ching, and doing, which is practiced a lot in our culture. The step of release, which is the fifth step of treatment, the final step of treatment, is to release to the universe the treatment, knowing that whatever we have declared is already so and is being established in consciousness. And then we listen. Is there something for me to do about that from spirit, not from our ego, not from our gotta work it, gotta make it happen, I don't believe this is really working. So treating and moving my feet is, in a way, it's saying, so I've just established this, I've just planted this seed in consciousness. Is there anything more I need to do? If I go plant in my garden and plant a seed, I need to do some watering and a little fertilizing once in a while, right? Okay? If I just plant it there and say, the process of growth will take over perfectly. Diana, when I moved here last year, gave me a tomato plant. And I had some people who say, oh, you don't need to water the tomato plant very often. And it was in a pot, by the way. I should mention that too. Don't water the tomato plant very often. So I didn't. And I couldn't understand. Other people were having beautiful tomatoes, and my thing was still a scrawny little thing that was maybe putting out one little flower, And finally she comes over and takes a look and she goes, "What are you doing? That thing needs water." I said, "But I was told not to water it." Okay? It's like, well, A, this is retting, and B, that's a pot, not the soil where it gets moisture. It's not sitting there in your sprinkler system anywhere. And so we need to do what we need to do for the thing. But there's a difference between trying to work it out of neediness and out of feeling that whatever we've been praying about and working is that we have to force it to happen, and saying, okay, so Spirit, how can I bring this into form? What am I being called to do right now about this? There's a difference. And so the thing is, when we release the treatment as being complete, we planted the seed, but we pay attention. Is there something that is mine to do? But we pay attention from the spiritual level. We listen to our intuition about that, rather than our intellect, which will often guide us the wrong way. Does that make sense? Okay. Great question. And then finally, what is the best way to approach treatments that involve other people? You get down on your knees and say, "Jesus, fix them." Did I get that right? No. So again, we go back to treatment is to change whose consciousness? My own. Okay, my own. So if I want to pray for Reverend Mary about something, if she comes to me and says, "Would you join with me in knowing this truth for me?" I change my own consciousness to where I can see her fully present in that experience right here, right now, in my consciousness. So I don't try to fix her, because she doesn't need fixing. Whoever that is out there doesn't need fixing. But I start to hold it and say, where is that within my consciousness? So the example the person gave here is building a super awesome Seva team. Okay? So where does the super awesome Seva team first exist? Within me. So where in my consciousness do I hold the idea of a super awesome Seva team of whatever subject it is that I want? And what would those qualities be? And this person has a couple of good qualities: harmony, cooperation within the immediate family. So we start to say, where can I embody that? Where can I be the place that is the embodiment of that Seva consciousness, which is what we call sacred service. It's a Hindu word for sacred service. So it's a selfless service. It's doing the what you might call volunteer work, but it's doing it with the idea that I'm giving this time and this service to God, as God. It's a very sweet, very sacred process. And so I'm not just walking through, volunteering. I'm walking through with the consciousness of I am God, giving and sharing this with other God beings. Okay? So I hold that in my own consciousness. That's how I create the prayer. If I want to know somebody else's health, I hold health as being the truth. I refuse to see sickness as the truth anywhere in my consciousness, and so I refuse to see it in that person's mind and body. And it's helpful when that person agrees with you, but they don't necessarily have to. It still alters your consciousness, and it still alters the consciousness of the whole. Does that make sense? And again, if you want to go deeper into that, Reverend Sue has a fabulous class coming up on treatment and meditation in next month. I love this question. Forgive, forgive, forgive. I hear this a lot, underlined and in capitals. I'm feeling beat up with our, just a minute here, with this overused word, like I'm in a rut. What's next? Take the next step, please. Love you. A Zen master was once asked by a student, what's the key to enlightenment? The Zen master said, attention. And the student said, well, yes, I've been sitting with attention for a long time, so that's the first step. What's the next step? The Zen master said, the first step is attention. The second step is attention. The 100th step is attention. And the student says, well, getting exasperated by now, says, well, in that case, what do you mean by attention? And the Zen master says, by attention I mean attention. Welcome to life. It's called a forgiveness process. As long as we have anywhere within us that we're upset about anything, including the senior minister talked about forgiveness, we have a place to do our forgiveness work. Most people that I know who teach forgiveness call it a daily process. It's not a one-time thing and then we're done with it. Because have you noticed that life continues on and people still irritate you? Maybe a couple of you are above that, but I find it's people still irritate me once in a while. Not you guys, I mean people outside of here. And so forgiveness is just the ongoing process, it's the ongoing process. And forgiveness is simply the lack of releasing condemnation. And so we catch ourselves, oh, I've been upset about that, I'm angry at that person, I've been irritated by that person, I'm going to release the condemnation. I'm going to replace it with love. Doesn't mean I have to like what they did. Doesn't mean I have to agree with what they did. Doesn't mean what they did was appropriate. Doesn't mean I have to be their friend. Doesn't mean I have to like them, have lunch with them, or anything like that. But I'm not willing to carry around the poison of my anger towards that person in my body anymore. So I love you and forgive. Why don't we talk more about the love of God? I kind of thought I'd do that just about every Sunday, but I'm not sure. I wasn't quite sure what to do with that one. There's a Hindu has the, I think there's 4 different personalities, and one of those is 4 different yogas, and one of those is Bhakti Yoga, which is the yoga of devotion. And it happens to be one that I'm in love with because I'm in love with God. And I don't oftentimes bring it into the center because I've kind of got the feeling that it would be a little, there's some history here and a little bit inappropriate. You know, I can sit and do Hindu chanting for an hour or more, you know, to one of the deities, understanding that it's not to that deity, but to the quality of that deity within me, to the Krishna within me, to the Hanuman within me, to the service within me, to the love within me. But I don't yet know how to bring that into the center here. You know, we've had a couple of people who have asked about chanting groups, and I say, yes, please start one up, and we haven't had them started up yet. And so I would be there, but I'm not the person who's going to start everything. But I love God, and I know that God is the absolute love of the universe. We are immersed in the love of God. We are absolutely immersed in the love of God. And so if I've not said that as clearly or as often as I need to, you know, I apologize, but that's where I'm at, and I think I bring that in almost every Sunday. So just that. What about bad karma? Can it be stopped? Yes. Stop doing whatever you're doing to put out the bad karma. Karma is simply the law of cause and effect. It simply says if I put something out into the universe, it's going to come back. And so some of us want to cheat the universe and say, hey, I want to put some bad stuff out in the universe, but I don't want the after effects of it. Okay? Sorry, it doesn't work that way. I didn't create the universe, that's just how it works. And by the way, I don't necessarily, and I don't think Science of Mind believes in karma as being some big thing hanging around from some far distant past that continues to shower all over, you know, and ruin your life, okay? So if that's what you're talking about by that question, there's no punishing God in the universe. There's no punishing God in the universe. One more time. Punishing God in the universe, okay? So there's only this infinite love that absolutely loves us, no matter what. And so if you have a belief in bad karma, your belief in bad karma will visit bad karma upon you because you believe in it. Okay? So as what was that, the Saturday Night Live skit with Bob Newhart? Stop it! What does it mean to reach Christ consciousness? It means to reach that sense of oneness with our true self, our infinite self. Christ consciousness is just another word for Buddha mind, for enlightenment, anything else, pure love, whatever we want to call it. How does religious science relate to nature? We believe that all of life is one with God, and we should be living in harmony with it all. If we are taught we are all one, how do we reconcile liberal versus conservative, black versus white, etc., etc.? Boy, that could take a long time to answer. I recently posted something on my Facebook page, and I had a person from this congregation who's sitting here today, who's more on the conservative side politically, respond, and got horrendously attacked by a bunch of my liberal Seattle Science of Mind friends. And I apologize for that. That was not my intention by posting that, and I eventually took the whole thing down. In God, there is no liberal versus conservative. There are liberals, there are conservatives, there's the wave, there's the light and the dark, the night and the day. There's the unique expressions of who each of us is, and it's okay to be the unique expression of who we are. We're not all the same, have you noticed? And how boring would it be if you were all clones of me? So in an infinite universe where there's the possibility of all forms of life, where there's the possibility of wave and particle, as we know from quantum physics, we have liberals and conservatives, black and white, Seahawk and 49er fans. We have all this. And we can either look at it and say, what's the similarity? Because the truth is there's more similarities between us than there are differences. Way more similarities than there are differences. And so what do we put our attention on? Do I put my attention on how different I am than you, and you are than me? Or do I find a way to where we can talk and have a conversation? And we talked about this yesterday in the class, and it would be, the world would be a much better place, and one of the ways for us to walk our talk is if we can have discussions with people who have different viewpoints from us, from a posture of love, from a position of love, from a position of being openly curious about what they believe, and even if we don't believe the same thing, being okay with their beliefs. See, I think conservatives are a good thing. We need them to keep flaming liberals from, going all callywhack. And we need some flaming liberals because we need them to get, the conservatives who don't want to do any changes, to get them to move along. That's the kind of original description of liberal and conservatives. Conservatives want to conserve and keep everything the same, and liberals want to, do wild and crazy things. Is that pretty good? Change. And we need the balance of both. We need both. We need black and white just like we need night and day. We need them both. Hopefully that covers that question. How does Science of Mind see financial budgeting and manifestation relate? We move our feet. It goes back to that original question. A budget is just simply a plan. What's my intention for where I want to spend my money? If you don't have an intention for where you want to spend your money, guess what? You'll spend it by whatever calls your attention to it. There's a difference between what's important, what's the highest value in my life, and what's urgent. And if you've noticed in time, your time oftentimes, if you're working for somebody, or working in an office or anything like that, your time can get pulled away by all the urgencies of the moment, and you don't deal with what's the important thing. So budgeting, like anything else, is just aiming, where do I want, and intending, where do I want to spend my money? And so it's a wonderful thing to do. So we don't have to sit here and be stupid and just say, well, I'm just going to take whatever comes along. We're not clams on the bottom of the ocean. We're powerful beings that get to create in our world, and budgeting is a process, or any other way of declaring what is my intention, where do I want to go, is a wonderful way of doing that. And finally, what does walking the talk look like? I have no clue. Walking the talk looks like being in integrity. Looks like being in integrity, being our authentic self as much, as often, as clearly as we can be. And you know, and I know who our authentic selves are, and you know what it feels like to be in alignment with that authentic self. And so you live from that. You live from a consciousness of, we are all one. You live from and when I forget about that and act out of that consciousness, I do forgiveness. Okay? We walk and live that talk, this spiritual practice. We walk the talk of love. Do I treat that person with love? I may disagree with them completely. Do I still love the person? You know, they may be doing stuff that's totally inappropriate. We had a question about ISIS this morning. Can I still hold the beings, the God beings that are the members of ISIS, in love? While recognizing that the actions they're doing are not appropriate. And finding out where within me that exists and seeing if we can't release that consciousness from the planet. Because, as I mentioned this morning, today we got ISIS. You know, in Jesus' time we had, or just after Jesus' time, we had the Emperor Nero burning Christians to use them as lamps in his garden. Okay? In Revelations, Nero is actually the mark of the beast. That prophecy has already been dealt with to some degree. It didn't happen the way it was described, but Nero was the mark of the beast. That was what his name works out to, is 666, because he would burn Christians literally in his garden, just pour kerosene or whatever it was they had at the time over them and light them on fire, and that's what his garden lamps were. You know, we've had Nazis, we've had the Spanish Inquisition, we've had all sorts of people doing all sorts of horrible things, and guess what? We're probably going to have that still for a while, until we all collectively change our mind. So we are here to change our mind. We are here to change the consciousness of the world and to change the consciousness of our own life. And that's the teaching of the science of mind, is that you have the ability to do that. And the question is, the only question is, will I apply it? You know, as the reading said, a change of consciousness does not come by simply willing or wishing. It is not easy to hold the mental attention to detail, to an ideal, while the human experience is discordant. But it is possible. Knowing the truth is a process of gradual unfoldment of the inner self, and that's what we're about. Let's pray. So taking a breath, recognizing that we are immersed in the love of God, we are immersed in the infinite consciousness of life, of love, of beauty, of wholeness. We are that right now. All of life. Not just human life, all of life, everywhere, in any realm, in every realm, is one of that infinite presence. There's no separation. There never has been, there never will be, it cannot be right now. Because if God is all there is, and it is, if that infinite love, if that infinite spirit is all that there is, by whatever name we give it, and it's beyond all the names, that spirit is pure love. Spirit is pure bliss, pure joy, pure life energy. And so I speak my word, that we recognize our oneness with that more and more. Not only our own, but each other's oneness with that. And we live from that consciousness ever more fully. We let go of the patterns and the processes that take us to hell. We let go of the belief in separation. We let go of the forgetting. We even let go of the idea that it has to be hard. Because it's our natural way of being. Bliss is our natural state of being. And so I know that each of us today remembers this to a greater degree, remembers our true state, our true essence of who we are, and brings more and more of that into our world, into our lives. As Jesus said, we take the bushel basket off of the light, we put it on the hillside, and let it light the world. That is who each of us is. We are the magnificence of the divine. And so I'm grateful for this wonderful teaching that supports us in remembering that as the truth of our being. I'm grateful for each person who has ever been part of this teaching, from those who have influenced Ernest Holmes, all those who have been in the history of this movement, all those who are to come in this movement, and all those who are present in this movement right here, right now. I'm ever so grateful. From the ancient wisdom teachers to the most up-to-date current person now and beyond. And so we allow this awareness, this remembering, this knowing of the truth of who we are, to be our truth, to be our life. We release the how that shows up in our lives into a law that knows exactly how to manifest it. And we just simply say, yes, I am willing. I'm willing to have this manifest. I'm willing to remember the truth of who I am. I may not know how, I may be scared of it, but I am still willing to go there. And that's all the Spirit needs, is that willingness. And so it manifests in form, it manifests in, through, and as our lives. And we let it be. And together we say, and so it is. Thank you.